Hi, welcome to Quid Pros Quo. I'm Zac,
And I'm Rin.
and today we are continuing our series on story structures and picking up where we left off last week, talking about the three-act structure. And today we are talking about the four-act structure. This is also sometimes called the seven-point structure. We have some very nice diagrams and references that we are going to include inside of the show notes. So if you want to see a visual representation for all of you visual learners out there, even though learning modalities are not styles, pedagogy. If you want a visual aid, we will have that inside of the show notes for you. But let us talk about the four-act structure. Just like last time, when we're talking about acts, we are talking about narrative blocks, narrative chunks that we use in order to frame our story and to put the meat on the bones. The major difference in between the four-act structure and the three-act structure is that the four-act structure splits Act 2 basically in half. And it gives a little bit more guidance about how the middle is supposed to work. Now, that being said, we have to make the disclaimer that when we're talking about the four-act structure, we're specifically talking about the Western incarnation of the four-act structure. Rin, do you want to talk us through a little bit about the Japanese four-act structure?
Yeah, so the Japanese four-act structure is actually something you introduced me to in freshman year, and I don't know if you remember this at all.
Oh, well, I guess I am, or at least me circa 6 years ago was the expert on this, but...
Yeah, you brought up like this Japanese four-act structure, and you were trying to experiment with it on something, but I don't remember what. But in Japanese storytelling, and a lot of non-Western storytelling, they're less focused on conflict. So the Japanese four-act structure is called Kisho Tenketsu, and I don't speak Japanese. I don't know if anyone knew that, but I don't. But, and I'll link a blog post talking more about it because I don't want to use our whole time talking about it because we're not experts in this. We are both white Western people. But if you want to look at like four-act structure and do a study of it, you want to look at like how Studio Ghibli tells their films. Like the one I always see quote is My Neighbor Totoro, where you have, and each of the like, it's not the syllables, but it's each of the like symbols in the Kisho Tenketsu, where ki is one, sho is another, ten's another, and then ketsu is the fourth. It's like each one represents a different act in the structure, and Act 4 is more of a turning point rather than a resolution of conflict. There's the TLDR.
So let's talk about this whole business of splitting Act 2. Both acts have at their center, and when I mean center, I mean like when you're looking at, if you were looking at a story as a timeline and you've chunked it up into your different acts, these are going to be in the middle. So not the end, but in the middle. These are called pinch points. And in a pinch point, generally what is happening is that the stakes of the story are rising and tension rises. So there are lots of different ways that you can do this: remove options, increase threats. Those are all perfectly valid ways of navigating a pinch point.
Yeah. So in this point, because you have the pinch points at the middle of the acts, the midpoint is now between acts 2 and 3, which makes it a little bit easier to write the midpoint, because we'll talk about this next week, but there's no like defined midpoint in like the 3-act structure or the hero's journey. Hero's journey is like kind of like, I don't remember what it's called in the hero's journey, but the Dark Night of the Soul equivalent, the all is lost moment. That's always at the bottom of the circle, and so people are like, oh, it's like the 50% mark. But kind of, sort of, not really.
Oftentimes in the stories that we're familiar with, usually the midpoint happens way before the abyss inside of the hero's journey.
Exactly. Yeah, and like Save the Cat is like 25% of the book before. It's like a full quarter of the book before it happens. And again, we'll get into that more next week, so stay tuned. But the midpoint is some kind of reversal, which is like, this could be called a false victory or a false defeat, is how Save the Cat always phrases it. But it could be some rules of the game change, or just the world turns upside down. Like, if you think, you have the phrase "the world turns upside down." I did not write that phrase. Zac wrote that phrase, but it immediately makes me think of Hamilton, end of Act 1, the musical, where they literally have the song "The World Turns Upside Down," and they go from like this wartime musical to a like political drama musical.
Well,
So
and that's a good point, is because often when you're looking at musical theater, the way that it's structured is that the acts inside of your playbill are acts 1 and 2, and then acts 3 and 4, and it's the
yeah,
midpoint where the break is.
yeah. I have never thought about musicals as a 4-act structure, but now that makes so much sense. I listen to so many musicals, and now I can put all the pieces just fell into place.
Clarification: I do not identify myself as a theater kid. FYI.
See, I'm totally a theater kid, even though I never actually did much theater as a kid. But like,
well, that's interesting, because I was a stage manager for a production when I was in high school.
sometime after we're not recording, I'll tell you why I wasn't a theater kid, because we don't even put my account on the internet for people to know this. But long story short, I've been listening to one song from the new Notebook musical, like the Notebook, like the romance musical, and it's changing my brain chemistry.
We love
Joy,
that.
I'm so sorry, I don't remember her last name because that's all I ever see is her TikTok tag, and it's Joy with the sun emoji. She killed it. That's all I'm going to say.
So for me personally, I really enjoy the section in a 4-act structure after the midpoint. So I really enjoy Act 3 as a reader, because this is where the unexpected can happen. Oftentimes the tropes dictate the kind of beats that you're going to hit during Act 2, but after you hit the midpoint, it becomes it becomes exciting and unexpected, because it can go any which way. Last week, I mentioned to you guys that I was going to bring up a Star Wars example of mismatching scale to answering the central question. And this is where I'm going to bring it in. Because in Revenge of the Sith, which is one of my favorite Star Wars movies, you have a mismatch in between where the conflict is resolved, which is on Mustafar, and where the broadest scale happens, which is during the Jedi Purge. The Jedi Purge happens at basically the midpoint of the movie. So you have one half of the movie where you have the Jedi, and then one half of the movie where the Jedi are on the run. And so there's an interesting disconnect in between scale and conflict resolution inside of Revenge of the Sith, which I would argue works a little bit better here because it is using a 4-act structure. Even though I will freely admit that Revenge of the Sith feels really long because of that mismatch.
Yeah. That is something I'm going to talk about next week, which is like, it's not a movie, so it doesn't have like words in the sense that like novels have words, but it's like word count versus word volume. And I'll talk about that more next week, which is a concept that my boyfriend introduced me to, and I'll get into it next week. Tune in next week. Gotta keep have something to keep them coming back, right?
Yeah, all of these episodes are so connected.
Yeah, we're doing great. But then generally, we've talked about Acts 2 and 3. I was going to ask, I had a question about Act 3 for you. Do you think that you said that Act 3 is usually where we step away from tropes and the unexpected happens. Do you think that varies by genre? Because I think in romance, it's very much expected that in the because it's, if you think of like Gwen Hayes romancing the beat, which I don't remember if we're going to do a whole episode on, but there's always like a 3rd act breakup in romance, and this is and it would line up with the 3rd act in the 4-act structure.
That does make sense that it would be genre dependent. I think during the 3rd act, particularly in fantasy and sci-fi, you have a little bit more freedom with your tropes, where I think you bring up a good point where with romance, probably contemporary. I don't write contemporary very much, so I'm not really familiar with the conventions of the genre. there are definitely going to be genres that have trope requirements during the third act. And for others, you get to play a little bit more, is at least my perception.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm starting to write a lot of romantasy. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking a lot at like romance beats and how to write romance. And it's just like, there's a third act breakup here. I don't know how to do a third act breakup. I've never done that before. Which is a lie. I did it in Witch's Blood, but it's just a very low-key breakup. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. Just wanted to bring that up that it could be genre-specific, and I wanted your thoughts on that. Yeah. We're going to wrap up with our pros and cons real quick. My pro is this works well with stories with 3 major events, like plot points 1, the midpoint, and plot point 3, because I was looking for a good plot structure for my Cinderella retelling with 3 balls, and I was like, 3 acts not going to cut it. Save the Cat's definitely not going to cut it. Ooh, that's like a 7-point/4 act. So that's a big pro.
You could be like ball 1, pinch point 1, ball 2, the midpoint,
exactly.
Ball 3, pinch point 2.
Yeah, it works so well. So if you have 3 major events happening, like if you're doing a Cinderella retelling like I am, could be good. Similarly, we already talked about it helps structure the middle. And well-written 4-act structures are really exciting because they feel like we talked about how the 3-act structure is often phrased as the plot coaster. This is way more of a roller coaster because you have more ups and downs.
Yeah. I think the major drawback that comes from the 4-act structure is that it's a little bit trickier to wrap your head around and to understand. But once you start like looking for it out inside of your media, you will find that the 4-act structure is a lot more common than you might suspect at first. And by identifying those 4-act structures, you can gain a little bit more facility with it. And as always, try it out. Trying it out is the best way to gain mastery when it comes to writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Next week, we will be talking about Save the Cat, both Save the Cat by Blake Snyder and Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody. I think we've each read one of them, but I don't think either of us has read both of them.
That's funny.
Yeah. I was like, I can do the Save the Cat novel part, and Zach, I know, has the screenwriter side down, so it's going to be a good talk. Make sure you don't miss it. It'll be up at probably 9 a.m. next Friday. That's the goal for all these episodes. But then I know RSS feeds sometimes take a while to sync, and sometimes my life gets crazy and I don't get to edit it on time. But anyways, 9 a.m. next Friday. Check your inbox. Should have more. Anyways, this has been Quid Pros Quo. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.
Quid Pros Quo is hosted by DC Winters and CK Jensen. If you like this episode, be sure to leave us a rating. And if you'd like to contact us, you can email us at quidprosquo@gmail.com. For more episodes, check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts.